A dream-shattered Carolyn Harper stood before the full-length mirror in her childhood bedroom, her fingers trembling as they traced the delicate lace of her grandmother's wedding veil. The afternoon sun filtered through the magnolia trees outside, casting dancing shadows across the antique furniture that had witnessed 3 generations of Harper women preparing for their wedding days. But unlike her mother and grandmother before her, Caroline felt no joy, only a hollow ache where excitement should have been. Her easel sat abandoned in the corner, half-finished paintings stacked against the wall like forgotten dreams. Art had been her escape, her passion, the one thing that made her feel truly alive. She had been accepted to the prestigious Savannah College of Art and Design, ready to pursue her dreams of becoming a professional painter. But that acceptance letter now lay buried in a drawer. As useless as her hopes had become, the news that changed everything 3 months ago. Her world had shattered over sweet tea and pecan pie at the Harper family dining table. Her father, looking older than his 58 years, had cleared his throat nervously while her mother gripped her hand under the table. "Caroline, sweetheart, there's something we need to tell you," her father had begun. Unable to meet her eyes, "When you were just a baby, I made an arrangement with Richard Blackwood. Our families have been connected for generations. And when his son Nathan was born, we agreed that one day you two would marry. It would unite our families and save the Harper textile business." Caroline had laughed at first, certain it was some kind of joke. Arranged marriages belonged in history books in foreign countries, not in modern-day Charleston. But the serious expressions on her parents' faces had quickly silenced her laughter. "Can't be serious," she had whispered, her voice barely audible. "This is America, not the 18th century. You can't just promise me to someone like I'm property." Her mother's eyes had filled with tears. "Baby, if we don't honor this agreement, we'll lose everything. The business, this house, your college fund. The Blackwoods hold the debt on all of it. Richard is calling in his marker. Meeting the stranger the day she met Nathan Blackwood. Rain pounded against the windows of his massive estate overlooking the Ashley River. The mansion was all steel and glass. Modern and cold, nothing like the warm historical homes that dotted Charleston's downtown. It felt more like a corporate headquarters than a home, which seemed fitting for the man who lived there. Nathan had been standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to her when she arrived. He was tall, powerfully built, dark hair styled with precision, and wearing a suit that probably cost more than her father's monthly income. When he finally turned to face her, Caroline's breath had caught despite her determination to remain unaffected. He was devastatingly handsome in that sharp, dangerous way that made smart women question their judgment. His jaw was strong, his features chiseled like a sculpture, and his eyes were the deep gray of storm clouds over the ocean. But those eyes held no warmth when they landed on her, only cold assessment. "So, you're the Harper girl," he had said, his voice deep and smooth, but completely devoid of emotion. "Caroline, isn't it?" "Yes," she had replied, lifting her chin with all the dignity she could muster. "And you're the man who thinks he can buy a wife like he'd buy a car." A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, had crossed his face before disappearing. "Not by honor and agreement made by our fathers. There's a difference, is there?" Caroline had challenged, her green eyes flashing with anger. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly the same." The cold reality Athen had circled her slowly, like a predator assessing prey. And Caroline had forced herself to stand still, refusing to show weakness. "Let me make something clear," he had said, his voice dropping to a tone that sent chills down her spine. "This marriage is happening whether you like it or not. Our family's futures depend on it. But don't expect romance or love or any of those fairy tale notions you probably grew up dreaming about. I wouldn't dream of expecting anything from someone with ice in his veins instead of blood." Caroline had shot back, surprising herself with her boldness. His eyes had narrowed dangerously. "Good, as long as we understand each other. You'll have everything money can buy, all the comfort and luxury you could want. In return, you'll play the role of Mrs. Nathan Blackwood in public. What happens in private is our own business. But I won't pretend this is anything more than a business arrangement." Those words had echoed in Caroline's mind for weeks, haunting her dreams and poisoning her waking hours. She had tried everything to escape the arrangement, even considering running away. But her father's health had been declining, and the stress of potentially losing everything was literally killing him. How could she be so selfish as to pursue her own happiness while her family suffered? The wedding day now, standing in her childhood bedroom on what should have been the happiest day of her life. Caroline felt like she was attending her own funeral. The dress was beautiful, an elegant ivory gown with a fitted bodice and flowing skirt that her mother had helped her choose. But it felt like a costume for a role she never auditioned for. "You look absolutely beautiful, sweetheart," her mother said softly from the doorway, her eyes red from crying. "I'm so sorry it has to be this way." Caroline turned to face her mother, this woman who had always been her rock, her confidant, her best friend. "Mama, there has to be another way. I can get a job, we can sell the house, anything but this." Grace Harper crossed the room and took her daughter's hands in hers. "Baby girl, we've explored every option. This is the only way. But you're stronger than you know. You have your grandmother's spirit, and she survived much worse. Sometimes love grows in the strangest places. Give it a chance." "Doesn't want love, Mama." He made that crystal clear. "Maybe that's what he thinks now," Grace said, gently adjusting Caroline's veil. "But a man who's so determined not to feel anything is usually running from feelings he's afraid of. Just remember who you are. You're a Harper woman, and we don't break. We bend, and we survive, and sometimes we even flourish in the most unlikely soil." Michael's church was filled with Charleston's elite, all dressed in their finest, whispering behind their hands about the unexpected union of the Harper and Blackwood families. Caroline walked down the aisle on her father's arm, her bouquet of white roses and magnolias shaking slightly in her grip. Nathan stood at the altar looking impossibly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his expression unreadable as he watched her approach. There was no love in his eyes, no anticipation or joy. He looked like a man attending a business meeting he'd rather skip. The ceremony passed in a blur. Caroline heard herself speak the vows, felt Nathan's hand, warm and strong, as he slipped the platinum band onto her finger. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Nathan he could kiss his bride, the kiss was brief, perfunctory, and as cold as their first meeting. The first night the reception at the Blackwood estate was lavish, with champagne flowing and a string quartet playing classical music. Caroline smiled when expected, accepted congratulations from strangers, and played her part perfectly. But inside, she felt numb, disconnected from her own body. When they were finally alone in the master suite, Nathan loosened his tie and poured himself a scotch from the bar. "Your suite is through that door?" he said, gesturing to a connecting room. "It has everything you'll need. I won't bother you there." Caroline stared at him in disbelief. "This is our wedding night." "This is a business arrangement," Nathan corrected, his voice flat. "I don't need to consummate anything to make it legal. You're free to decorate your space however you like, buy whatever you want. I've already arranged for credit cards in your name. You think that's what I want?" Caroline's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "Money and pretty things?" Nathan turned those cold gray eyes on her. "What you want is irrelevant. This is what you have. I suggest you make peace with it." He walked out of the room, leaving Caroline alone on what should have been the most intimate night of her life. She sank onto the enormous bed, still in her wedding dress, and finally let the tears come. This was her life now, married to a man who treated her like an inconvenient acquisition, trapped in a gilded cage with no hope of escape. But as she cried herself to sleep that night, Caroline made a silent promise. She would not let this break her. She would find a way to survive, to find purpose and meaning, even if she couldn't find love. Nathan Blackwood might have her name and her presence, but he would never have her spirit. That she would keep for herself. What Caroline didn't know was that behind the closed door of his own bedroom, Nathan stood at the window, his jaw clenched and his hands fisted at his sides. He had seen the devastation in her eyes, the way she'd looked at him like he was a monster. And the worst part was, she wasn't wrong. He had built walls around his heart so high and so thick that nothing could penetrate them. He had learned early that love was weakness, that caring made you vulnerable, that the only thing you could trust was power and control. But watching Carolyn walk down that aisle, so beautiful and so broken. Something inside him had stirred, something he thought he'd killed long ago. He crushed it immediately. Feelings were dangerous. Feelings got you hurt. Better to be the monster she thought he was than to risk becoming the vulnerable fool his father had always despised. But as he stared out at the dark waters of the Ashley River, Nathan couldn't quite shake the image of green eyes filled with tears, or the memory of how right her hand had felt in his, or the dangerous thought that maybe, just maybe, he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, finding purpose in the darkness. Morning sun barely penetrated the heavy curtains of Caroline's suite when she woke 3 days after the wedding. The room was beautiful, decorated in soft creams and golds, with a view of the meticulously maintained gardens. But beauty couldn't fill the emptiness that had settled in her chest like a stone. Nathan had left for his office. Before dawn each day, returning late at night, they passed each other like ghosts in the massive house, exchanging polite nods, but nothing more. Caroline felt like she was slowly disappearing, fading into the expensive wallpaper and luxurious furniture until there would be nothing left of the girl who once dreamed of painting sunsets and falling in love. On the fourth morning, Caroline made a decision. If Nathan wouldn't let her be his wife, and if she couldn't pursue her art career, then she would find another purpose. She remembered passing a community center during the drive to the Blackwood estate. It's a modest building with a faded sign that read Hope Harbor. That afternoon, she called for the driver Nathan had assigned to her and asked to be taken there. Hope Harbor, the Hope Harbor Community Center, sat in one of Charleston's forgotten neighborhoods, where paint peeled from wooden houses and children played in streets that needed repaving. It was a world away from the pristine lawns and historic mansions of the downtown area. A world Caroline had been sheltered from her entire life. Diana Foster, the center's director, was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and hands that showed years of hard work. She looked surprised when Caroline walked through the door in her designer dress and expensive shoes. "Can I help you?" Diana asked, her tone cautious. "I hope so," Caroline replied, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "I'm looking to volunteer. I have time and I want to help, if you'll have me."
Diana
studied her for a long moment, and Caroline had the uncomfortable feeling of being seen through, as if this woman could read every privileged moment of her life. But then Diana smiled. "We can always use help. Fair warning, though, this isn't a photo opportunity for society, ladies. This is real work with real people who have real problems. Can you handle that?" "I want to try," Caroline said softly. "I need to try." That afternoon changed everything. Caroline met children who came to the center after school because their parents worked 3 jobs to make ends meet. She met women who were learning to read at 40 because they'd never had the chance before. She met teenagers who were trying to escape the violence of their neighborhoods through art and music programs that were criminally underfunded. And she met Tommy. Boy who changed everything. Tommy was 7 years old, with gap-toothed smile and eyes too old for his young face. His mother had died the year before, and his father was in prison. He lived with his grandmother, who did her best, but was fighting cancer and could barely afford her medications, let alone give Tommy the attention he needed. The boy was sitting alone in a corner, drawing on scrap paper with broken crayons when Caroline first saw him. Something about his isolation called to her own loneliness. "What are you drawing?" she asked gently, sitting down beside him. Tommy looked up at her with suspicious eyes. He's clearly not used to strangers showing interest. "Nothing," he mumbled. "It doesn't look like nothing to me. It looks like a dragon." His eyes widened slightly. "You can tell? Most grown-ups just see scribbles." Caroline smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in days. "I used to draw a lot. Dragons were my favorite too. Do you know what I think your dragon needs?" "What?" "Wings. Big, powerful wings that could carry him anywhere he wanted to go. Want me to show you?" For the next hour, Caroline and Tommy drew together. She showed him techniques for shading and perspective, and he showed her his imagination, a world where dragons protected children and heroes always won. When his grandmother came to pick him up, Tommy hugged Caroline tight. "Will you come back?" he asked. "I promise," Caroline said, and meant it. An unexpected visitor. 2 weeks passed, and Carolyn fell into a routine. Mornings were spent at Hope Harbor, where she'd started an art program for the children. Afternoons, she used to organize fundraisers and grants applications with Diana. Evenings, she returned to the Blackwood mansion, ate dinner alone, and slept in her beautiful, empty suite. Nathan remained absent, a ghost husband she barely saw. But she told herself she didn't care. She had found something that mattered, something that made her feel alive again. Then one Tuesday afternoon, everything shifted. Carolyn was helping Tommy mix paint colors when Diana appeared at the art room door, her expression odd. "Carolyn, you have a visitor." "A visitor." Caroline frowned, setting down her brush. "Who?" "Your husband." The words hit Caroline like a physical blow. Nathan was here? At Hope Harbor? She couldn't imagine two worlds more opposite than the one he inhabited. In this place, she found him standing in the center's main room, looking completely out of place in his $1,000 suit among the worn furniture and scuffed floors. His presence seemed to shrink the space, his height and broad shoulders making everything around him appear smaller. "Nathan," Caroline said, her voice carefully neutral. "What are you doing here?" He turned to face her, and she saw something flicker in his gray eyes, something she couldn't quite identify. "I wanted to see where you've been spending your days. Why? Afraid I'm embarrassing the Blackwood name by associating with poor people?" His jaw tightened at her sharp tone. "That's not why I'm here." "Then why are you here?" Before he could answer, Tommy appeared at Caroline's side, his small hand slipping into hers. "Miss Caroline, is this man bothering you? Should I get Miss Diana?" Caroline's heart melted at his protective stance. This little boy ready to defend her against a man 3 times his size. "It's okay, Tommy. This is my husband, Nathan." Tommy's eyes widened as he looked up at Nathan. "You're married to Miss Caroline? You're the luckiest man in the world." Something shifted in Nathan's expression. He crouched down to Tommy's level, and Caroline held her breath, half expecting him to dismiss the child with cold words. Instead, his voice was gentle when he spoke. "What makes you say that?" "Because Miss Caroline is the best," Tommy said, with the absolute certainty of childhood. "She teaches us art, and listens to our stories and never makes us feel bad about where we live or what we don't have. She makes us feel like we matter." Nathan's eyes lifted to meet Caroline's, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "She makes you feel like you matter," he repeated softly. "That's a special gift." Seeing through new eyes over the next hour, Caroline watched in amazement as Nathan toured Hope Harbor. He asked Diana intelligent questions about their funding and programs. He listened to the teenagers talk about their dreams. He even sat through one of Tommy's elaborate stories about dragons and knights without checking his phone once. But it was when they reached the art room that everything changed. Caroline had covered one wall with the children's artwork, bright splashes of color and imagination that transformed the dingy space. Nathan stopped in front of a painting Tommy had done. A simple picture of a house with a family standing in front, all holding hands. "His mother died last year," Caroline said softly, coming to stand beside Nathan. "He lives with his grandmother now, but she's sick. That painting is his dream of what he wishes he had." "And you've given him hope," Nathan said, his voice rough. "You've given all of them hope. I've just given them art supplies and some attention. It's not much." Nathan turned to face her, and the look in his eyes stole her breath. It wasn't the cold assessment she'd grown used to. It was something warmer, something almost like admiration. "It's everything," he said. "Caroline, I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, Diana rushed into the room, her face pale. "Caroline, it's Tommy. His grandmother just collapsed. The ambulance is on the way, but he's terrified. He's asking for you." Caroline ran without thinking, Nathan close behind her. They found Tommy in Diana's office, tears streaming down his face as 2 paramedics worked on his unconscious grandmother. The moment Tommy saw Caroline, he launched himself into her arms. "She won't wake up," he sobbed. "Miss Caroline, she won't wake up." "I know, sweetheart, I know," Caroline murmured, holding him tight. "But these nice people are going to help her. They're going to take her to the hospital where doctors can make her better. Can I go with her? I don't want her to be alone. The paramedics shook their heads. Sorry, kid. No room in the ambulance. Is there someone who can bring him to Charleston General? I will, Carolyn said immediately. Then she looked at Nathan, expecting him to make an excuse to leave. Instead, he stepped forward. We both will, Nathan said firmly. Tommy, you'll ride with us, okay? And we'll stay with you until your grandmother wakes up. The hospital vigil Charleston General's emergency room was crowded and chaotic, but Nathan somehow managed to get them into a private waiting area. He made phone calls Caroline couldn't hear, spoke to doctors in low tones, and within an hour had arranged for Tommy's grandmother to be seen by the best cardiac specialist in the state. Tommy had fallen asleep against Caroline's shoulder, exhausted from crying. She stroked his hair gently, her own eyes burning with unshed tears. Thank you, she said softly to Nathan, who sat across from them, for what you did today. For the doctor, for staying. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the sleeping child. When I was 8, my mother had a heart attack. My father was away on business, and I was alone with her when it happened. I called 911, but I was so scared. I kept thinking she was going to die and I'd be all alone. Caroline stared at him, shocked. In all their interactions, Nathan had never revealed anything personal, never shown any vulnerability. What happened? She survived. But my father blamed me for not staying calm, for not handling it better. He said weakness was unacceptable, that fear was for lesser people. I learned to shut it all down after that. Every feeling, every emotion that might make me vulnerable. Nathan, Caroline whispered, her heart aching for the frightened 8-year-old boy he'd been. That's not weakness. That's being human. His eyes met hers, and she saw something crumbling in that gray gaze, some wall beginning to crack. When I saw you with Tommy today, the way you made him feel safe and loved, I realized something. I've spent my entire life trying not to feel anything because I thought that made me strong. But you, Carolyn, you feel everything. You let yourself care about these kids knowing they might disappoint you or leave you or break your heart. That takes real courage. I'm not courageous, Caroline said, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I'm just doing what feels right. It's exactly what makes you courageous. Nathan moved to sit beside her, and slowly, hesitantly, he reached out to wipe away her tears with his thumb. The gentle touch sent shivers through her entire body. I've been a fool, Caroline. I married you thinking I could keep you at a distance, that I could control every aspect of our arrangement. But watching you today, seeing the kind of woman you are, the way you light up these children's lives, the passion you bring to everything you do. What? Caroline breathed, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell had fallen over them. I don't want distance anymore, Nathan said, his voice rough with emotion. I want to know you. Really know you? I want to understand what makes you smile, what makes you angry, what you dream about late at night. I want a chance to be worthy of the way Tommy looked at me today when he called me the luckiest man in the world. The first real kiss, Carolyn's heart was pounding so hard she was sure Nathan could hear it. You hurt me, she whispered. Those first weeks, the things you said, the way you treated me like I was nothing. I know, Nathan said, and the pain in his voice was real. And I'm sorry. God, Carolyn, I'm so sorry. I don't have any excuse except fear. I was afraid of what you made me feel from the moment I saw you. You were everything I'd trained myself not to want, warm and open and full of life. I thought if I could keep you at arm's length, I could maintain control. But I was wrong. What changed? Caroline asked, needing to understand. You did. Everything you did. The way you refused to let this marriage break you. The way you found purpose when I gave you nothing. The way you loved these children without expecting anything in return. You showed me what strength really looks like, and it's nothing like what my father taught me. Nathan's hand moved to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the size and strength of his hands. I don't deserve a second chance. I know that. But I'm asking for one anyway. Let me prove that I can be the man you deserve. Let me show you that this arrangement can become something real, something worth keeping. Caroline should have pulled away. She should have protected her heart from a man who had already hurt her once. But looking into Nathan's eyes, seeing the vulnerability there, the genuine remorse and the hope he was trying to hide, she found herself leaning into his touch. "If we do this," she said softly, "if we really try, there can't be any more walls between us. No more secrets. No more pretending. I need all of you, Nathan, not just the parts you think are acceptable. You'll get all of me," Nathan promised. "Even the broken parts." Then he leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, to change her mind. But Caroline didn't want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him. Wanted the possibility of something real blooming from the ashes of their cold arrangement, when their lips finally met. It was nothing like the brief, impersonal kiss at their wedding. This kiss was warm and deep and full of promise. Nathan's arms came around her carefully, as if she were something precious he was afraid of breaking. Caroline melted into him, one hand fisting in his shirt, the other sliding up to tangle in his hair. The kiss was apology and forgiveness, hope and possibility. Everything their marriage had been missing wrapped into one perfect moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to mess this up," he warned. "I'm going to be terrible at this emotional honesty thing. I've spent too many years being someone else." Caroline smiled, the first real smile she'd given him since they met. "Then I'll help you learn. We'll figure it out together." "Together," Nathan repeated. And the word sounded like a vow, a new beginning a week later. Caroline woke to find Nathan sitting at the end of her bed, holding 2 cups of coffee and looking nervous. "What are you doing?" she asked, sitting up and pushing her hair out of her face. "I wanted to have breakfast with my wife," Nathan said. "If she'll have me." Caroline's smile was instant and bright. "She will." Over coffee, Nathan told her about his childhood, about a father who saw emotions as weakness and a mother who'd learned to hide her feelings to survive. He told her about building his empire, about the loneliness of success when there was no one to share it with. He told her about watching her walk down the aisle and being terrified by how beautiful she was, how much he'd wanted her even as he pushed her away. Caroline shared her own stories, her dreams of being an artist, her fear of losing herself in their arrangement, her discovery of purpose at Hope Harbor. They talked until the coffee grew cold, until the morning light turned golden, till it felt like they'd known each other for years instead of weeks. That afternoon, Nathan appeared at Hope Harbor with a surprise. He'd arranged for a complete renovation of the art room, new supplies for all the programs, and a trust fund for Tommy's grandmother's medical bills and his future education. "You did this?" Diana asked, tears in her eyes as she looked at the check. "Caroline did this," Nathan corrected. "She showed me what really matters. I'm just the guy writing the checks." But it wasn't just the money that mattered to Caroline. It was the way Nathan spent the afternoon playing dragons with Tommy, his expensive suit getting paint-stained as he helped the children with their projects. It was the way he listened to Diana's ideas for expansion with genuine interest. It was the way he looked at Caroline across the room, his eyes warm with something that might just be love. The jealous. Their newfound happiness was tested 2 weeks later at a charity gala. Caroline wore a deep emerald dress that Nathan had helped her choose, his eyes darkening with appreciation when she'd modeled it for him. "You're stunning," he'd murmured, pressing a kiss to her bare shoulder. "Every man in that room is going to hate me." "Good," Caroline had teased. "Maybe then you'll understand how I felt watching women stare at you."
At the gala,
Nathan kept Caroline close, his hand on her back, his attention focused on her in a way that made her feel like the only woman in the room. They were talking with Diana about a fundraiser for Hope Harbor when a sultry voice interrupted them. "Nathan Blackwood, I heard you'd gotten married, but I had to see it to believe it." The woman was breathtaking in that cold, perfect way of models and actresses. Platinum blonde hair fell in waves past her shoulders. Her red dress was painted on, and her smile was predatory. "Jessica," Nathan said, his voice carefully neutral. "Caroline, this is Jessica Monroe. We dated briefly a few years ago. Jessica, my wife Caroline." Jessica's eyes raked over Caroline with barely concealed disdain. "How charming. I didn't know you had a type for Southern belles with charity projects. How quaint." Caroline felt Nathan tense beside her, but before he could respond, she spoke up. Her voice sweet but with steel underneath. And I didn't know Nathan had a type for women who mistake cruelty for sophistication. How unfortunate for you that he's evolved. Jessica's perfect smile faltered. I see you've found yourself a little spitfire, Nathan. But we both know this won't last. You're not the type to settle down, not really. You get bored easily, remember? People change, Nathan said coldly. Some of us grow up and realize that the shallow, meaningless relationships we had before were exactly that. Shallow and meaningless. And what makes this one different? Jessica challenged, her eyes flashing with jealousy. What makes her so special? Nathan turned to look at Caroline, and the love in his eyes made her breath catch. Everything, he said simply. She makes everything different. She makes me want to be better, do better, feel more. She's shown me that life is more than boardrooms and bottom lines. And I thank God every day that she's willing to give a man like me a chance. The sincerity in his words brought tears to Caroline's eyes. Jessica's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You'll regret this, she hissed before stalking away. I'm sorry about that, Nathan said, pulling Caroline into his arms. She's always been bitter that I wouldn't commit to her. Can you blame her? Caroline teased, though her voice was shaky. You're kind of a catch. Nathan laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Says the woman who's transformed my entire life in a matter of weeks. I love you, Caroline. I should have said it sooner, but I love you. Caroline's heart soared. I love you too, she whispered. Even when you're being stubborn and closed off, even when you make me want to scream, I love you. Their kiss was interrupted by applause. They'd forgotten they were in a room full of people, but Caroline found she didn't care. Let them see. Let the whole world know that their arranged marriage would become something real and beautiful and worth celebrating, as they swayed together on the dance floor later that night. Caroline thought about how much had changed in such a short time. The cold stranger she'd married had become the man she loved. And their business arrangement had transformed into a partnership built on trust and genuine affection. But as perfect as this moment felt, neither of them knew that their happiness was about to be tested in ways they couldn't imagine. Because secrets have a way of surfacing. The past never stays buried forever. The perfect morning Caroline woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of rain pattering against the windows. Nathan's side of the bed was still warm, which meant he hadn't been up long. After that night at the gala, they'd stopped pretending to live separate lives. Nathan had moved his things into her suite, and every morning she woke up and his arms felt like a gift. She found him in the kitchen, wearing pajama pants and nothing else, his hair adorably mussed as he attempted to make pancakes. The sight made her heart swell with love. Good morning, husband, she said, wrapping her arms around him from behind. Good morning, wife, he replied, turning to kiss her properly. I'm trying to make breakfast, but I think I'm failing spectacularly. Caroline laughed, looking at the lumpy batter. It's the thought that counts. They ended up ordering breakfast from their favorite cafe and eating it in bed, trading bites of croissants and planning their day. Nathan had cleared his morning schedule to accompany Caroline to Hope Harbor, something he'd been doing more frequently. Watching him interact with the children, seeing him use his business acumen to help Diana solve problems, had only made Caroline fall deeper in love with him. Hey, Tommy's been asking when you're coming back, Caroline said. He wants to show you the dragon painting he finished. Hey. Nathan's face lit up with genuine pleasure. I'll stop by this afternoon. I have a meeting with Benjamin Ross first, but it shouldn't take long. Benjamin Ross was Nathan's business partner and oldest friend. They'd built the Blackwood real estate empire together, turning a modest family business into a billion-dollar operation. Carolyn had met him a few times and found him charming, if a bit slick. What's the meeting about? Caroline asked, stealing a strawberry from Nathan's plate. Just routine stuff. He's been handling a development project in Miami. Wants to go over the numbers. Nathan caught her hand and kissed her palm. Nothing for you to worry about. The news that shattered everything. Carolyn was teaching an art class that afternoon when Diana burst into the room, her face pale and her phone clutched in her hand. Carolyn, You need to see this. Now. Something in Diana's voice made Caroline's stomach drop. She followed the older woman into her office, where Diana pulled up a news website on her computer. The headline made Caroline's blood run cold. Billionaire developer Nathan Blackwood under investigation for fraud and financial crimes. Caroline's hands shook as she read the article. According to the report, federal investigators had uncovered evidence that Nathan had been involved in a massive real estate fraud scheme, using shell companies to hide assets, manipulating property values, and defrauding investors out of millions of dollars. The allegations went back years, long before Caroline had met him. "This can't be true," Caroline whispered. "Nathan wouldn't do this." But even as she said the words, doubt crept in. How well did she really know him? They'd only been truly together for a few weeks. What if everything he'd shown her was a lie? What if she'd been just another piece in his game? Her phone rang. "Nathan, Carolyn, where are you?" His voice was tight with stress. "At Hope Harbor." "Nathan, what's happening?" "The news is saying don't believe anything you read. I'm coming to get you. We need to talk, but not over the phone." The confrontation, Nathan arrived 30 minutes later, looking like he'd aged 10 years. His suit was rumpled, his tie askew, and there was a wildness in his eyes that scared Caroline. This wasn't the controlled, confident man she'd come to know. They drove home in silence. The tension in the car thick enough to cut. Once inside the mansion, Nathan poured himself a drink with shaking hands. "Talk to me," Carolyn said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Tell me what's happening." Nathan downed the scotch in one gulp before turning to face her. "It's all coming apart. Everything I've built, everything I've worked for, they're going to destroy me." "Who?" "The investigators." "Nathan, if you didn't do anything wrong, but I did do something wrong." The words exploded from him. "Not what they're accusing me of, but other things. Things I'm not proud of. And now someone's using those things to make it look like I'm guilty of crimes I never committed." Caroline felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "What things? What did you do?" The painful truth Nathan sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. When he looked up at her, his eyes were full of agony. "In the early days, when I was building the company, I cut corners. Not illegal corners, but ethical ones. I bought properties from desperate people at prices I knew were too low. I used connections and influence to get deals that smaller companies couldn't access. I was ruthless in ways that kept me up at night." He stood and began pacing, unable to meet her eyes. "And there was one deal about 5 years ago. A housing development in Atlanta. I knew the area was going to be rezoned, knew the properties would triple in value. I had inside information from a friend on the zoning board. I didn't use it to commit fraud, but I used it to time my purchases perfectly. It was legal, technically, but it was wrong. And now, someone has twisted that into evidence of a pattern of criminal behavior." Caroline felt tears burning behind her eyes. "Who would do that? Who's trying to frame you?" "Benjamin." Nathan's voice was hollow. "My business partner, my friend, or at least, I thought he was my friend." The betrayal over the next hour, Nathan explained how he'd discovered the truth. Benjamin had been embezzling from their company for years, using the same shell companies and financial tricks that were now being attributed to Nathan. When Nathan had started to uncover the evidence, Benjamin had gone on the offensive, leaking doctor documents to investigators and the press that made Nathan look guilty. "He's been planning this for months," Nathan said, his voice bitter. "Maybe longer. He knew I was getting too close to the truth, so he decided to destroy me first, and he's doing a damn good job of it." Caroline's mind was reeling. "Can you prove you're innocent? Can you show the investigators what really happened?" "I'm trying, but Benjamin covered his tracks well. And my early ethical lapses, the corners I cut, the questionable deals, they all make me look guilty. Even if I can prove I didn't commit fraud, my reputation will be destroyed. The company will collapse. And worst of all," his voice broke, "I might go to prison for crimes I didn't commit." I made the choice that night. Caroline lay awake long after Nathan had fallen into an exhausted sleep beside her. Her mind kept circling back to one question. Did she believe him? Everything she'd learned to love about Nathan, his growing kindness, his generosity with Hope Harbor, His gentleness with Tommy, was that all real? Or had she been fooled by a master manipulator? But then she remembered his face when he'd first told her he loved her. She remembered the way he'd cried when Tommy's grandmother had recovered from her heart attack. She remembered the vulnerability in his eyes when he talked about his childhood, about learning to shut down his emotions. That wasn't a man capable of the calculating fraud he was being accused of. That was a man who'd made mistakes, yes, but who'd been trying to become better. That was a man worth fighting for. The next morning, Caroline found Nathan in his study, surrounded by legal documents and looking defeated. "I think you should leave," he said without looking up. "Go back to your parents' house. File for divorce. I won't contest it. You don't deserve to be dragged down with me." Caroline walked over to his desk and swept all the papers onto the floor. Nathan looked up in shock. "What are you doing?" "Getting your attention," Caroline said firmly. "Now listen to me, Nathan Blackwood. I didn't marry you expecting a fairy tale. I married you in an arrangement neither of us wanted. But somewhere along the way, that arrangement became real. You became the man I love, flaws and all." "Caroline, I'm not finished," she interrupted. "You made mistakes. You did things you're not proud of. Welcome to being human. But I know you, Nathan. I know your heart. And I know you didn't commit fraud. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to fight this together. We're going to prove your innocence. And we're going to come out stronger on the other side." Tears were streaming down Nathan's face. "You believe me? Even knowing everything I've done?" "I believe you," Caroline said, moving around the desk to take his hands. "I believe in you. And I'm not going anywhere." The investigation the next few weeks were the hardest of Caroline's life. Federal agents showed up at the mansion with search warrants. Reporters camped outside their gates. The society women who'd welcomed her into their circles now whispered behind her back, but Caroline held her head high. She continued her work at Hope Harbor. Even when donors started pulling their funding because of the association with Nathan, she stood by his side at every court appearance, her hand firmly in his. And she used every connection she had to find people who could help prove his innocence. It was Diana who provided the breakthrough. One of the women at Hope Harbor had a brother who worked in Benjamin Ross's office. The brother had noticed some irregularities and, after some convincing from Diana, agreed to come forward with evidence. The documents he provided showed a clear pattern of Benjamin, manipulating accounts and creating false paper trails. More importantly, they included emails where Benjamin discussed his plan to frame Nathan. Agent Patricia Mills, the FBI investigator in charge of the case, was a tough woman in her 50s who'd seen every trick in the book. But even she couldn't ignore the evidence Caroline and Nathan's legal team presented. "This changes things," Mills admitted during a meeting at the federal building. "If these documents are authentic, and our preliminary analysis suggests they are, then we've been looking at the wrong man." The confrontation with Benjamin 2 weeks later, Nathan received a call from Agent Mills. "We've arrested Benjamin Ross. We wanted to give you the courtesy of knowing before it hits the news." Nathan's hand was shaking when he hung up. "They got him," he told Caroline. "It's over." But it wasn't quite over. Benjamin requested to see Nathan one last time before his arraignment. Against his lawyer's advice, Nathan agreed. Caroline insisted on going with him. They met in a conference room at the Federal Detention Center. Benjamin looked haggard, his expensive suit replaced with an orange jumpsuit. But there was still a smirk on his face when Nathan and Caroline walked in. "Come to gloat?" Benjamin asked. "I came to understand why," Nathan said quietly. "We were friends, Benjamin brothers. Why did you do this?" Benjamin's smirk faded. "Because you were always the golden boy. Richard Blackwood's perfect son. Everyone loved Nathan, trusted Nathan, wanted to be Nathan. Do you know what it's like to always be in someone's shadow? So you tried to destroy me." "I tried to take what should have been mine," Benjamin corrected. "The company, the success, the respect. It should have been mine. I was smarter than you, worked harder than you. But you had the name, the connections, the luck." "It wasn't luck," Caroline spoke up, her voice cold. "It was character. Nathan built relationships based on trust and integrity. You built a house of cards based on lies and greed. That's why you're here and he's not. Benjamin's face twisted with rage. You think you know him? You think your little love story is real? He married you for business, just like everything else he does. You're just another transaction. That's how it started, Caroline said calmly. But it's not how it ended. Nathan knows how to love now. He knows how to be vulnerable and honest and real. Those are things you'll never understand because you're too busy being jealous of everyone else to build anything genuine yourself. Nathan squeezed Caroline's hand gratefully. I'm sorry you felt overshadowed, he said to Benjamin. If I'd known, maybe we could have worked through it. But what you did, the people you hurt, that's on you, and you'll have to live with it. Rebuilding the charges against Nathan were formally dropped 3 days later. A press conference was held where Agent Mills publicly apologized for the investigation and announced Benjamin's arrest. Nathan's reputation began the slow process of recovery, but the experience had changed him. He sold off several properties and businesses, choosing to focus on smaller, more ethical projects. He partnered with Hope Harbor to create a job training program. Using his real estate expertise to teach young people valuable skills, Caroline's art program expanded to 3 more community centers across Charleston. And when Tommy turned 8, Nathan surprised him by setting up a college fund and officially becoming his mentor. On their first anniversary, Nathan took Caroline back to St. Michael's Church. They stood at the same altar where they had spoken vows neither of them had meant. I want to do this again, Nathan said, taking her hands. For real this time. Not because our families arranged it, not because we have to, but because I choose you. Every day, I choose you. Caroline's eyes filled with happy tears. I choose you too. The good, the bad, the messy, complicated, beautiful you. They renewed their vows in a small ceremony with just their families and the kids from Hope Harbor. Tommy served as ring bearer, proudly carrying the new bands that would replace their old ones. As Nathan kissed his wife, really kissed her with love and passion and complete devotion, Caroline thought about how far they'd come. They'd started as strangers forced together by circumstances. They'd become enemies, then allies, then friends, then lovers. But most importantly, they'd become partners. Equal partners who faced life's challenges together, who supported each other's dreams, who weren't afraid to show their flaws and vulnerabilities that night. As they lay tangled together in the darkness, Nathan traced lazy patterns on Caroline's bare shoulder. Do you ever regret it? He asked softly. The way we started. The arrangement? Caroline considered the question. Sometimes I wish we'd had a normal courtship, that we'd had the chance to fall in love without all the pressure and pain. But then I think about everything we've been through, everything we've overcome, and I realize it made us stronger. The strength and struggle. Caroline propped herself up on one elbow to look at Nathan in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom windows. If we'd had an easy love story, we might not have learned to fight for each other the way we did. We might not appreciate what we have now. Nathan reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch infinitely gentle. You're saying our pain had purpose? I'm saying our pain taught us what really matters, Caroline corrected. It stripped away all the pretense and forced us to be real with each other. Not many couples get that, even the ones who marry for love. Nathan pulled her down for a long, tender kiss. When they finally broke apart, he whispered against her lips, I never knew I could be this happy. I never knew happiness like this even existed. Neither did I, Caroline admitted, but we found it together. And that's what counts. A new crisis emerges 3 months after the renewed vows. Caroline was at Hope Harbor helping Tommy with his homework when she felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. She gripped the edge of the table, breathing deeply until the feeling passed. Miss Caroline, are you okay? Tommy asked, his young face creased with concern. I'm fine, sweetheart, Caroline assured him. Just stood up too fast. But it wasn't the first time it had happened. Over the past few weeks, she'd been feeling exhausted, experiencing moments of nausea and lightheadedness. She'd attributed it to stress from helping Nathan rebuild his business reputation and expanding the art programs. But Diana had noticed. Caroline, honey, when was your last checkup? Diana asked later that afternoon. I don't know, a few months ago? I think you should see a doctor. You've been looking pale, and I've noticed you getting dizzy. Probably just tired, Caroline protested. Diana gave her a knowing look. Or you're pregnant. The word hit Caroline like a thunderbolt. Pregnant. They hadn't been trying, but they hadn't been preventing it either. In the bliss of their renewed marriage, they'd simply let nature take its course. I need to take a test, Caroline whispered, the news that changed everything again 2 days later. Caroline sat in Dr. Rachel Foster's office, her hands trembling as the doctor reviewed her test results. Nathan had wanted to come with her, but she'd insisted on going alone, not wanting to get his hopes up if it turned out to be nothing. Congratulations, Caroline, Dr. Foster said with a warm smile. You're about 8 weeks pregnant. Everything looks healthy and normal. Caroline's hand went instinctively to her still flat stomach. A baby. She was carrying Nathan's baby. The man who'd once told her their marriage would be nothing but a business arrangement was going to be a father. Joy flooded through her, followed quickly by fear. They'd been through so much already. Was it too soon? Were they ready for this? What if something went wrong? I can see you're processing, Dr. Foster said kindly. It's normal to feel overwhelmed. Take your time telling your husband. And remember, my door is always open if you need to talk. Caroline drove home in a daze. She found Nathan in his study, reviewing contracts for a new affordable housing project he was developing. When he looked up and saw her face, he immediately stood. What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Not a ghost, Caroline said, her voice shaking. A future. She pulled the ultrasound picture from her purse and handed it to him. Nathan stared at it for a long moment, his brow furrowed in confusion. Then understanding dawned and his face transformed with wonder. Is this? Are you? We're having a baby, Caroline confirmed, tears streaming down her face. I'm pregnant, Nathan. The papers in Nathan's hand fluttered to the floor as he crossed the room in 2 strides and swept Caroline into his arms. He held her so tight she could barely breathe, his whole body shaking. A baby, he whispered into her hair. We're having a baby. When he finally released her enough to see her face, there were tears running down his cheeks. I never thought I'd have this. A real family, a child to love and raise. Carolyn, you've given me everything. We're in this together, Caroline reminded him. We'll figure out how to be parents the same way we figured out how to be married, together. Facing old demons, but Nathan's joy was complicated by fear. Over the next few weeks, Caroline noticed him becoming increasingly anxious. He threw himself into preparing the nursery with almost manic energy, buying every baby item he could find, reading parenting books late into the night. Finally, Caroline confronted him. Talk to me. What's really going on? Nathan was standing in the nursery they'd been setting up, staring at the crib he'd just assembled. What if I'm like him? He said quietly. Like who? My father. What if I'm cold and distant, and I damage our child the way he damaged me? Caroline's heart broke for him. She walked over and took his hands. Nathan, listen to me. You are nothing like your father. You've spent the last year learning how to open your heart, how to love without conditions. You're going to be an amazing father. How do you know? Because I've seen you with Tommy and the other kids at Hope Harbor. I've seen the patience you have, the genuine care, and most importantly, you're aware of the mistakes your father made. That awareness alone will help you avoid repeating them. Nathan pulled her close, his hand resting on her small baby bump. I want to do this right. I want our child to grow up knowing they're loved, that emotions aren't weakness, that it's okay to be vulnerable and human. Then that's exactly what we'll teach them, Caroline promised. The baby shower surprised when Caroline was 6 months pregnant. Diana and Grace Harper threw her a baby shower at Hope Harbor. The community center was decorated with handmade decorations created by the children, and everyone from their world came together in that modest space. Society. Women who'd once snubbed Caroline after Nathan's scandal showed up. Their attitudes changed by his redemption and the genuine good work he'd been doing. Tommy proudly wore a shirt that said Big Brother in Training, a title Nathan had given him when he'd asked if he could be involved in the baby's life. But the biggest surprise came from Nathan himself. Midway through the shower, he stood up and asked for everyone's attention. Most of you know that my marriage to Caroline started as an arrangement, he began, his voice steady, despite his obvious nervousness. "What you might not know is that it was the worst and best thing that ever happened to me." He turned to look at Carolyn, his eyes shining with love. "Worst because I spent months being the kind of husband no woman deserves. Best because it brought me Caroline, who refused to let me stay that man. She fought for us when I'd given up. She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. She taught me what love really means." Nathan knelt beside Caroline's chair, taking her hand. "Every day with you is a gift. Every challenge we've faced has made us stronger. And now we're about to face the biggest challenge and blessing of all, becoming parents. I can't wait to watch you be a mother. I can't wait to raise this child with you. And I can't wait to see what the future holds for us." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Carolyn cupped Nathan's face in her hands. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. "More than okay. We're going to be extraordinary." The arrival Carolyn went into labor on a stormy October night, 3 weeks before her due date. Nathan drove to the hospital with white knuckles, trying to remember the breathing techniques they'd learned in Lamazi class while Caroline gripped his hand hard enough to cut off circulation. "You're doing great, baby," he kept saying. "Just breathe. We're almost there. If you tell me to breathe one more time, I'm going to strangle you." Caroline gasped between contractions. Despite the pain, Nathan laughed. Even in labor, his wife was fierce. The labor was long and difficult. 12 hours stretched into 18, then 20. Caroline was exhausted, her face pale and drawn. Nathan never left her side, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, whispering encouragement, being her anchor in the storm. "I can't do this anymore," Caroline sobbed during a particularly brutal contraction. "I can't." "Yes, you can," Nathan said firmly, holding her face so she had to look at him. "You're the strongest person I know. You survived being married to me at my worst. You can survive anything." Caroline laughed through her tears. "That's actually a good point." At 3:47 in the morning, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that filled the delivery room. The doctor placed her on Caroline's chest, and both parents burst into tears. She was perfect. Tiny and red-faced and screaming, but absolutely perfect. She had Caroline's delicate features and Nathan's dark hair, and when she finally opened her eyes, they were a striking gray-green that seemed to capture both her parents. "Baby girl," Caroline whispered, running her finger gently over the baby's cheek. "We've been waiting for you." Nathan couldn't speak. He could only stare at his daughter, this impossibly small person who'd just changed his entire world. When the nurse asked what they were naming her, he looked at Caroline with a question in his eyes. They'd discussed names for months but had never quite settled on one. Now, holding their daughter, Caroline knew exactly what felt right. "Hope," she said softly. "Her name is Hope." Nathan's eyes filled with fresh tears. Hope. It was perfect. This child represented everything they'd fought for, everything they'd overcome. She was proof that love could bloom in the darkest places, that people could change. That happiness could be found even when you'd given up looking for it. "Hope Caroline Blackwood," Nathan said, his voice rough with emotion. "Welcome to the world, sweetheart. Your mom and I are going to do our best not to mess you up too badly." Coming full circle 6 weeks later, Carolyn stood in the art room at Hope Harbor. Hope sleeping peacefully in a carrier strapped to her chest. She was teaching a class to a new group of children, showing them how to mix colors and create their own masterpieces. Tommy, now 9 and more confident than the scared 7-year-old she'd first met, was helping the younger kids. His grandmother had made a full recovery and had gotten a job managing the community center's after-school program. The trust fund Nathan had set up for Tommy's education was growing. Ensuring he'd have every opportunity to pursue his dreams, Nathan arrived just as the class was ending. His tie loosened and his shirt sleeves rolled up. He'd come straight from a meeting with investors for his new project. It's converting abandoned warehouses into affordable artist studios and living spaces. "How are my girls?" he asked, pressing a kiss to Caroline's temple and then gently stroking Hope's tiny hand. "Perfect," Caroline said, leaning into him. "We're all perfect." Looking around the art room. At the children's bright faces and colorful paintings, at Tommy proudly showing Nathan his latest drawing, at Diana beaming at them from the doorway, Carolyn realized it was true. Their life wasn't perfect in the traditional sense. They still had challenges, still had moments of doubt and fear, but they had each other. They had their daughter. They had their community. They had built something real and lasting from the ruins of an arrangement neither had wanted. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked, always able to read her moods. "I'm thinking about that first day we met," Caroline admitted. "When you told me not to expect love or romance or fairy tales." Nathan winced. "I was an idiot." "You were scared," Caroline corrected gently. "But look at us now. We got the fairy tale anyway, just not the way either of us expected." Nathan wrapped his arms around both Caroline and Hope, holding his entire world close. "Better than a fairy tale," he murmured. "Because this is real. The struggles, the joy, the growth, all of it. This is our story, and I wouldn't change a single chapter." As the sun set over Charleston, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the Blackwood family headed home together. Behind them, the walls of Hope Harbor were covered with art that told stories of transformation and second chances. And in the center of the wall, in a place of honor, hung a painting Tommy had made. It showed a dragon and a princess, but unlike traditional fairy tales, they weren't fighting. They were standing side by side, protecting a castle full of children underneath. In Tommy's careful handwriting was a caption, "Real love means growing together." Carolyn had cried when she first saw it, because Tommy, in his childlike wisdom, had captured the truth of her and Nathan's story perfectly. Love wasn't about perfect beginnings or easy paths. It was about two imperfect people choosing to grow together, to fight for each other, to build something beautiful from whatever materials life gave them.